Time now for the must-read opinion pages, and in his latest column for the New York Times entitled Joe Biden, Closet Republican, Frank Bruni puts forth that former Vice President Biden is the liberal Bob Dole, the looser Mitt Romney, the supposedly safe bet who's owed a shot. He writes in part this: I recognize the model for Joe Biden's unusual campaign, the former president whose pitch Biden's most closely resembles George W. Bush. I'm referring to Bush's first presidential bid in 2000. Bush's strategy and success arguably hinged less on selling himself as a new kind of Republican than on being seen as a tested, trusted, traditional brand. Biden is campaigning on his 8 years as vice president. He's also campaigning on the nostalgia of his surname, the familiarity of his presence, and the comfort of his aura. And that's not just a tactic from Bush's playbook. It's quintessentially a Republican move. Biden is trying to get Democrats to do something that Republicans have more practice at. Choose a nominee who's due over one who's new. He's the liberal iteration of Bob Dole, the looser version of Mitt Romney, John McCain without Lindsey Graham glued to his side. He has his raft of policy positions, many of them echoes or adaptations of Obama's, but they're not what his supporters think of first. They're not what he thinks of first either. And Joe, I just wonder, is there something wrong with that? I mean, I'm not sure this is a criticism, or is it one?
Well, I'll tell you what, Mika, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
So long as he wins.
Exactly.
If he loses, people will be writing about it for the next 4 years. Let's bring in the chairman of Priorities USA, Guy Cecil. Guy, there have been moments where I've talked mainly to Democrats, a lot of Democratic donors, also a lot of Democratic grassroots people. And when I'm talking to him about Joe Biden and asking, how are you feeling about Biden? How's the party feeling about Biden? How the grassroots people feeling about Biden? How the money people? It sounds eerily like what I heard about Bob Dole in 1995. And I say to myself, uh-oh. So is Frank Bruni onto something? Because after all, going with a safe bet didn't work for Republicans with Ford, Dole, Romney, McCain. So even though that's a Republican shtick, it's not a winning approach. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the challenges for Joe Biden in the context of the Democratic primary is that he's an institutionalist at a time where our faith in institutions is declining. He wants to make the institutions of government and of Washington work for middle-class people and for the rest of America. And I think he has to do a more compelling job of talking about how fixing those institutions actually helps us build a more inclusive economy, how it appeals to the issues that are most salient in the Democratic primary. The worst thing you could call somebody in the Democratic primary is a closet Republican. I'm not sure most Republicans would agree with that assessment of Joe Biden. But certainly he has some work to do in making sure that he's as forward-looking as possible, not just to deal with the fact that he's an institutionalist, but obviously to deal with what I would consider unfair criticisms of his age as well.
Yeah, so Guy, help me out here, because we hear all the time that Americans want somebody that can bring both sides together. You look at most polls, and Americans say they want to get things done. They want somebody like Joe Biden who can bring Republicans and Democrats together, or they're like somebody on the Republican side that could do the same. I'm wondering if they're just saying that to make the person who's conducting the focus group feel better about themselves, or the pollster to seem like they are actually not just retreating into the tribalism. Or, with all the people you've talked to and all the swing voters you've focused on, have you found that there actually is a market for somebody that can bring both sides together?
Well, I think most Americans want a president that can bring both sides together to do all of the things that they agree with and none of the things that they disagree with. which typically is how most of us work. But I think this is a reflection more as a response to Donald Trump. The thing that we hear most often, whether it's in focus groups or talking to people around the country, is that they are uneasy, not just with policy, not just with ideology, but with the incoherent way that this president actually runs or pretends to run the government of the most powerful country on the planet. What people are looking for is stability. They're looking for vision. They want to believe that every day doesn't bring a new raft of horror upon the country, that there's a plan to accomplish the things that they're setting out to do. And yes, they do want both parties to work together, but not just an absence of an agenda. And I think the important part of what Democrats need to communicate is not just what they believe, but how they will get it done coming into January of 2021.
So, Michael Steele, we should point out that the hand-wringing we're seeing among many Democrats about Joe Biden comes about a candidate who still, even after that debate in the Real Clear average, is up by 11, 12 points in this primary. A lot can change. A lot changed after that debate. How much is this conversation a reaction to his performance over those 2 hours on the stage in Miami?
I think that's a lot of it, Willie. I think it is a reaction to that. I think it's always kind of been bubbling beneath the surface, even before Vice President Biden got into the race. This sort of, sense of, well, we want to push the future now. We want to push into the future now with this set of candidates versus what Biden would bring to the table as a traditionalist, if you will. But I want to push back on Guy and Joe just a little bit here. In terms of the references to these foregone, long ago Republicans and how this plays out. That works if you're talking about a conventional presidential race. If the Republican opponent to Joe Biden is a conventional Republican opponent. That's not the space we're in. We're in a very asymmetrical political space, and everybody in this town and outside of this town are still playing a very conventional game against Donald Trump, which is why he kicks their butt every single day, from politics to the media. So what then becomes the underlying strategy in an asymmetrical political game against an opponent who doesn't give a damn about convention and about the sanctity and purity of the process? How do you put together and push forward a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris or a Buttigieg?
Well, look, I think you have two things that are really important to understand. Number one, we can't be chasing Trump every time he says something stupid, or otherwise we'd just be chasing Trump on his terrain every day, all day long. And number two, we need to make sure that we are actively pushing things that we think the American people care about, not just in a primary, but in a general election. My biggest concern about where we are today as Democrats is that there is so much focus on the primary, that we're letting Trump get away with advertising online, probably advertising on television by the spring, organizing on the ground in several states. We need Democrats who aren't just paying attention to the primary, but are preparing the largest, most aggressive campaign, and yes, Michael, the most unconventional campaign against this president.
Switching gears to what's going to be a high-profile Senate race, Amy McGrath had record fundraising for her challenge to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, but yesterday ended up voicing very different opinions about Judge Kavanaugh, saying at first in an interview that she saw nothing in his record that would disqualify him, and then later on Twitter offering an apology, suggesting that she would have voted no for his confirmation, and saying that she knows she disappointed some of her supporters. So my question to you is, it's the same idea. Is this a moment where trying to suggest that you could work with the other side, that you could work with Republicans, could hurt her chances? Or is that something you need to do in Kentucky at the risk of alienating this sort of liberal energy that seems to be behind her, according to that fundraising number?
Look, I think the most important thing that Amy McGrath can do is just be Amy McGrath. I think a lot of times when we get into Senate races, particularly in red states, which I have a lot of experience in, you have people that try to calculate the most salient position, the position that's going to appeal to the largest number of people, which in theory sounds great for a campaign. But if it's not authentic, if it's not who you are, it's going to backfire. I think McGrath has an amazing story to tell. Her service in the military, compared to what McConnell has been doing for the last 30 years, which is single-handedly destroying the United States Senate and turning it into basically a playing ground for Donald Trump and his cronies. McGrath just needs to be McGrath. Say what she believes, be unapologetic about it. And people will forgive difference if they feel like you're being authentic and you have them at the core of your campaign. What they won't forgive, what they won't forgive is inauthenticity. What they won't forgive is just thinking that a set of poll-tested narratives is going to be successful, whether it's a blue state or, in this case, a red state.
Yeah, so Guy, can a Democrat win the state of Kentucky being against Judge Kavanaugh?
I think so. I mean, we've had cases before where there's been these types of disagreements. There's no question it's a challenge, but people want, well, I still hope that people want United States senators that are of principle. And if the entrance fee to being in the United States Senate is supporting somebody like Judge Kavanaugh, then it's not a Senate I would want to be in.
Guy Cecil, thank you very, very much. And still ahead.
And by the way, go Gators. Nice Gators tie.
I noticed that. I noticed your tie looked a little orange and blue as well. So I appreciate you not talking about Darth Saban this early in the morning.
All right. Still
We'll save
ahead.
it for the next
President
time.
Trump originally planned to have nationwide immigration raids take place in June, but they were postponed. Now those raids have been rescheduled for this weekend. We'll have new reporting on that. And as we go to break, we have a first look at the new issue of Time magazine. This week's cover story is an interview with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This month, Netanyahu will officially become the longest-serving prime minister in the country's history. And according to Time, many Israelis have been alarmed by his efforts to remain in power. Time magazine also has an exclusive look at the rebuilding efforts taking place at the Notre Dame in Paris. The man responsible for overseeing the reconstruction of the iconic cathedral says the true extent of Notre Dame's damage will not be known until at least the end of the year. We're back in a moment with much more Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.